Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and some of the videos I've made in the last few days, some of the comments have been interesting, and they obviously are not necessarily a consensus. Obviously a lot of people didn't take this stance, but it was this idea from quite a few bodybuilders in the videos I've made of some of the bodybuilders passing recently who've done some very extreme things, taken things too far to their furthest extremes, and it's cost them their lives, their health, things like that. Of some people taking the attitude of, well, still, bodybuilding is better than being out of shape and not working out. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's kind of talk about that. Because there seems to almost be within that particular community, and I don't consider myself a bodybuilder. I need to remind people, if people say, what do you mean everyone knows you're not a bodybuilder? No, clearly they don't. Because a lot of the people do come in and say you're a terrible bodybuilder and stuff in some of these videos. Well, I'm not a bodybuilder at all. Yeah, I'm pretty terrible at it because I don't make any effort to do it. I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm a fitness enthusiast. I work out, former power lifter, but no, I'm not a bodybuilder. And if you want to be a bodybuilder and that's what makes you happy, hey, more power to you. I'm fine with that. Do what enriches your life. Do what enriches your life. I don't see anything wrong with enriching your own life in a way, as long as you're not harming your health or hurting yourself or other people doing whatever you happen to be doing. By all means, carry on. So that being said, though, is almost this idea you see within that community that there's no middle ground, that either you're a bodybuilder or you're out of shape. Either you're a bodybuilder or you don't lift. Or you don't exercise, you don't work out at all. And that's really almost a bizarre concept you see within that community oftentimes, particularly on the internet. That's why we have the, all the things of, do you even lift, bro? And people will say that to people who very clearly lift. I mean, hell, I get that. And you guys see me rep out 500 pounds on a deadlift. I can overhead press 200 pounds for reps. Standing. Pretty obvious I lift. But, I get that a lot. But then other people who aren't as big as me but still work out are still in good shape. People will be like, do you even lift, bro? And we all know that's in good fun and that's joking. Sometimes guys are serious. But it kind of highlights the bigger picture that we have a community here as a whole that struggles to differentiate between just black and white thinking. Either you are part of their more extreme end of the community, or you're a person who doesn't lift, who doesn't work out. That they don't seem to distinguish between the average sedentary American male and a bodybuilder. That they almost act as if there's no middle ground, when in fact the majority of people who exercise are in that middle ground. Very, very few people who are fit and healthy and work out actually identify as bodybuilders at all, or even see themselves that way. Now, that's not to say that Joe Weider and other people in the bodybuilding world didn't try to make it seem that way, but you guys got to remember that's for marketing purposes. That's not necessarily reality. That was guys trying to market who were involved in bodybuilding, were involved in supplements, trying to market it to make it all inclusive for everyone who works out. Oh yeah, you're a bodybuilder. Because they had marketing and products built around that term and that idea. But the reality is, and a lot of bodybuilders, it would do well to step back and remember, not everyone who works out has a goal of being a bodybuilder. And in fact, taken to its extremes, being a bodybuilder can be just as bad for your health, just as unfit, and in some cases even worse than the average sedentary person. Even worse, and I mean, perfect example. Look at a couple of these guys who've died recently, 26 years old, 46 years old. Average person, even with a relatively unhealthy lifestyle, even someone who maybe smokes cigarettes, eats McDonald's, doesn't exercise, they aren't dropping dead in their 40s that often. It happens, but usually it's a combination of genetics with a really bad lifestyle, even worse than average. You don't see that often. All right, so we need to understand the difference here. Taken to the extreme that someone like Rich Piana or Dallas McCarver, any of these guys took things, that's way more unhealthy than the average American who doesn't work out at all. It's way more unhealthy. Now, it isn't to say that some people who do engage in bodybuilding can't be healthy, and it's fair to say that anyone who's lifting weights, follows a good diet, does cardio, is probably going to be a lot healthier than the average person who doesn't exercise. That's a totally reasonable statement. And that would include people who choose to engage specifically in bodybuilding. All right, that would include them to a very large extent. But it's also important to remember, for even the bodybuilders, remember they're only a tiny segment of people who do that. There are tons of people, there are millions of people out there who lift weights, who do cardio, who exercise regularly, who aren't obese, who eat relatively healthy diets, eat mostly whole foods, who don't chase those goals. They don't have that same specific goal in mind. But aren't they fit? Aren't they healthy? Don't they even lift? Aren't they in much better shape than the average person who's sedentary? Of course they are. Of course they are. And I think it's important to remember that for the majority of people, that might be a preferable lifestyle than chasing the bodybuilding thing. And again, it's important to remember that if you're not necessarily competitive, and I don't really think of there being non-competitive bodybuilders, but since people identify that way, I'm not going to tell people they can't be what they identify as. If you identify as a bodybuilder and want to call yourself a bodybuilder, that's fine. You don't necessarily have to be competitive. But the competitiveness becomes unhealthy intrinsically. Even the natties, and it's mainly because they oftentimes beat themselves up, their bodies up in the gym. They push harder than they probably should when dieting down. Injuries are common. Dieting down that lean, really extreme diets isn't particularly healthy. All right, that's not necessarily a healthy lifestyle when you get to the competitive point. Just like I would say strength training is healthy. Strength training can improve health, longevity, quality of life. Taken to the extreme that powerlifters do, and I'm speaking as someone who has competed in powerlifting quite a few times, can also be unhealthy. All right, taken to the competitive level, it can become unhealthy. We could argue all day long about how unhealthy, but it can become unhealthy. When we're talking about just general fitness and being in shape, the vast majority of people who are fit and in shape aren't bodybuilders. They aren't power lifters, and they clearly even lift, bro. And it's kind of important to remember that, because you seem to almost within these communities get this black and white thinking that either this is what you do or you're out of shape and there's no middle ground, when the reality of the matter is the middle ground actually is the majority of people who exercise and are fit. The middle ground is people who have no intention of ever competing in anything. And I'll give you the example of how I've seen this go to the level of where people trying to pretend that middle ground doesn't exist has actually harmed certain people. And I'll give you an example. I met a guy at a gym, was in pretty good shape, worked out. He'd been training about 4 or 5 years, and he's sitting there going, I'm really thinking about competing. And I'm like, competing in what? He goes, well, bodybuilding. As if, everyone who works out who competes, because he reads so much internet stuff. Everyone who works out, if they compete, it's clearly in bodybuilding, right? It's not football. It's not tennis. It's not golf. It's not powerlifting. He means bodybuilding. Okay. And I ask him, well, is that really what you want to do? I mean, you think that'll make you happy? And he goes, well, no, I don't really want to do it, but, it seems like a waste for me to spend years working out and lifting weights if I don't compete. Like, what's the point if I'm not going to go compete in bodybuilding? It seems kind of pointless, doesn't it? And here was a guy who was fit and in shape and clearly looked healthy to me. This is a guy who's improved his quality of life, his health, his well-being, right? He's improved his confidence, his health, everything. He's going to have lower rates of cancer, lower rates of diabetes, all these benefits from eating a good diet and exercising regularly. But then he goes, but it seems kind of pointless if I don't go compete. But he actually didn't really, it wasn't a drive. It wasn't like he was going, man, I really want to compete. He says, I probably should go compete. I'm thinking about maybe competing next year. But not because he wanted to. Not because he thought it would make him happy, but just because it seemed like that's what everyone else does who trains for years and years. Like, what's the point otherwise then? Isn't that kind of the point? And that's a guy who lost the plot because he didn't even really want to do it. And I thought that was interesting. And for me, that conversation with a guy at a gym made me kind of realize this community kind of does try to push this sort of stuff. Like, if you're not going to go compete, you're not serious about your fitness and lifting. But this is a guy who clearly was, because he was in shape. I mean, the guy had been working out for years. He'd been working out past that 3 to 4 year mark consistently every week, ate a good diet, and took care of himself. That's the point. That's the point. What's wrong with that? That is better than the average person who never takes care of themselves. That right there. And that's a reward in and of itself, isn't it? And we've got to learn to start seeing it that way. We really do need to learn to start seeing it that way, that reward for that was intrinsic. That guy's going to have better health and better quality of life and be better off for the efforts that he put into his own health and fitness. There was no need to compete. He didn't even have a real desire to do so. It was just because everyone else is doing it. And that's not really a good reason to do anything, is it? Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.